Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our final session, the most awaited session of the day. Not because it's the last, but because it's one of the most interesting for sure. So my name is Licínia Simão. I'm from the Faculty of Economics and a researcher at the Center for Social Studies, both at the University of Coimbra. And of course, it's my great pleasure to host you for session number 8, Security, Trade, and Information in the 21st Century Atlantic. We have 3 authors presenting today: Pedro Seabra, Homa Azodi, and Celine Rodrigues. And we will be listening to our speakers in the order of the panel. So I will give the floor to Pedro, and I'll present him briefly while he heads to the podium. So Pedro is, technology doesn't want to collaborate with me. So Pedro will be presenting a paper called Tidal Waves of Informality, the G7++ Friends of the Gulf of Guinea and Counter-Piracy Solutions in the Atlantic. Pedro is an assistant professor at CEI-Iscte, University Institute of Lisbon, and the deputy director of CEI, the Center for International Studies. He is also the co-editor of the Portuguese Journal of Social Science. If you have a paper that you want to publish, talk to Pedro. I know he's reaching out. And he is currently the director of the PhD program in History, Security Studies, and Defense. Pedro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Licínia, for that kind of introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. Let me start, of course, by thanking LPAZ Forum for once again hosting me, and Antonio, of course, for always making the best of our stays here. I have a confession to make. I've been secretly using my participation in these conferences as a testing ground, as a laboratory for me to explore ideas. And I came to realize I have to apologize to quite a few people here in the audience who will have to yet again listen to me explore those ideas, especially Licínia, Antonio, and Monica's not here. João told me yesterday he still remembered my presentation from last year. So I'll be trying and show you some progress of what I've been doing for the last year, building upon a bit of what I brought here last year. So I think it brings a bit of continuity to my presentations. And so I hope you'll also enjoy that part. First and foremost, just a slight change in the title, because I was not very content with it, and I'll explain later on what it means in practice. So most of my work from an academic point of view has been this constant insatisfaction with the state of multilateralism. I've always been attracted by how states and non-state actors come together and form solutions and mechanisms to try and tackle some of the world's problems. But I've also been very aware that there's been this sort of insidious narratives about the state of multilateralism. We are always or constantly confronted with this sort of headlines that the world is handing, doomsday scenarios, that every and single instance of multilateralism that we know or that we've come to know in the last few years is about to die or to be crippled down. And so I confess yet again, I brought this last year, but I still think it very much holds itself, and it is very much applicable to the current state that we know about the world around us. We are constantly asking if multilateralism is in crisis. We ask ourselves, can it be saved? And then we end up getting to my favorite question, like, is it really in crisis though? Or are we really in reality just looking constantly to the same old instances of multilateralism, and we are ignoring perhaps a bit of the reality that has gone by without receiving that much focus or merit from our part. So this is just a bit of the standard definitions in IR theory about how we should consider or define multilateralism. It is a definition that has been very much pegged to what we know about the UN, about the EU, about NATO, but this has never fully satisfied me. I've always been one to claim that this hinders our view of the world, and that we in fact are not getting the complete picture about what's been happening, about what has been created, and what has been perhaps some enduring solutions to some of what of the problems in the world from multiple domains. And one of those realities, or one of those domains that I've been arguing like a prophet in the area that we have been ignoring, has been precisely the issue of informal multilateralism. And luckily enough, you don't have to trust me, because I'm not the only one saying that this is indeed something that we have been neglecting. There have been a couple of colleagues that in recent years have been doing considerable efforts in terms of showcasing or demonstrating that this has indeed been a fixture of the international order as we know it. We just have been not paying enough attention to it. And so these colleagues, especially Felicity Vebeles and Duncan Snydell, who were the first ones in 2013, but then Charles Roger and Sam Rowan in 2023, they've built up this extensive data sets in which they've tried to map all these different types of informal multilateral mechanisms. And so the first, Felicity and Duncan's, they reached, I think, 92 instances of informal multilateral platforms, whereas Charles and Sam actually have pointed out that we have at our disposal, the current disposal, a total of 260 informal multilateral organizations, mechanisms, whatever you want to call them. But of course, what does exactly mean an informal multilateral organization? And here they provide slightly different definitions of what we should be on the lookout for. So the first set of authors, they focus, or they tell us that we should focus on trying to find high-level associations of three or more states that have an explicitly shared expectation about how they should behave or what they should pursue from a multilateral point of view. But they point out that we cannot see, that we should see participation in regular meetings, but at the same time that there should not be any kind of significant institutionalization. Meaning we should not see any kind of headquarters or secretariat. Otherwise, it's a bland, standard, formal, multilateral organization. And I'm not interested in those ones. The second set of authors, they pretty much stick to the same script, but they do make a very interesting definition in the sense that this kind of organizations need only to display a certain threshold of institutionalization. Just because they have a secretariat, for example, does not mean that they are going to the dark side and becoming a full formal organization. So with this, me setting the stage for this kind of discussion, I've been nagging about this kind of question. If indeed this has been a hidden fixture of the international order of informal, international, intergovernmental organizations just laying around, being there, existing, and being of use to the world at large, can we really think of different ways of look at it? Most of those works, when we think of international organizations, they hold certain variables constant. And one of it, which I think is particularly self-evident, is that we don't consider enough how geography or territory or lack of it might actually change how this kind of international organizations, and informal ones in particular, might also be different, more prone to be useful to states, for example. And so this has been the question driving most of my work. If we indeed accept that informality is a thing, can we untangle it and speak of a different kind of informality if it is based, for example, on maritime-specific dynamics? This, of course, led me to open a can of worms from an IR point of view, especially if we consider that most of the literature, international relations, they don't really focus on international organizations as something that is affected by the territory or the lack of it in which they are based. And this is mostly because the field has been kind of concerned still with the so-called territorial trap, meaning that we focus on states, and because states are the main actors around us and they have territory, this means that international organizations, because they are not states, they cannot control territory, ergo, they are not affected by the lack of it. But recently, there's been quite a lot of work from several colleagues that have tried to push a bit the field in this regard, especially forcing us to think of international organizations as somewhat focused on spatially imagined territories. And here, I'm not mentioning the outer space, just this sort of different limits upon which those organizations can be based. And therefore, if we consider the international organizations can actually be built around, based upon different spatially imagined territories, we can then begin to consider how those organizations, which actually have maritime spaces at their core, might actually just be sort of different from other international organizations. So this was my workaround to the issue. But this only provided me with a theoretical basis to it. So what I did was I went into one of the databases that I consider more reliable in this regard, and based upon a series of criteria, looking upon if those organizations were based on maritime issues, if they were composed by island states alone, for example, I extracted a sample of where I believe to be a more representative sample of maritime informal intergovernmental organizations. And so as of 2015, we actually had 53 of those cases. And this tells us one thing. First, that overall increase in informality around the world has actually been built upon this kind of maritime experiences. But it doesn't tell us much more than that. So I went and packed a bit 3 of those cases in that database, and they are pretty much very interesting because they point us in very different directions. You have the Nile Basin Initiative, which is very much focused on regulating and managing the waters of the Nile River. You have the Alliance of Small Island States, which have been very proponent, let's put it like that, in terms of climate change negotiations. Or you have the contact group on the piracy of the coast of Somalia, which has also been very important on itself in terms of gathering all international partners to tackle this kind of issues. But still, this was just my initial forays into the issue. I wanted to start and conceptualize how we can think of maritime informality. And so this is my proposal that I came up with. And of course, this is very much debatable. It's still very much a work in progress, but I do believe that it points us to some places that we haven't yet thought of when thinking about maritime issues and international organizations. So when speaking about maritime informality, I think there are 3 expectations that we should talk about in this kind of discussion. The first one is that a maritime space in common implies a sizable geographic space in between a zone, and therefore the calls for a support entity might be more accentuated to ensure more sustainable procedures. A second expectation would be that maritime issues are particularly prone to a more diverse gamut of actors, and therefore that the spectrum of participants, but also the difficulties in tracking their involvement might also increase. And lastly, because of this track record in terms of international maritime law, we know there are recurrent legal grounds behind this kind of informal experiments, but I would argue that the embedment within other multilateral arrangements might be sought out at the expense of additional forum shopping with other organizations. And overall, my idea really to try and speak about these issues is that because of the distinct spaces that they are based upon, I would argue that maritime informality may invoke heightening dynamics of sustainability, accountability, and embeddedness in regional practices. And so, because I was not content with this, I decided to explore this further with a specific single case study in the context of the Gulf of Guinea. And very quickly, here we know, or most of us, or some of us in this room for sure, have seen some work on it. And what we know is that there have been over the years this need to support regionally tailored security architectures, the need to improve communication among international partners, and the need to coordinate the provision of capacity building to local and regional actors, which means that the context was very much prone or favorable to this kind of experiments. And so in 2013, we actually saw the emergence of my case study coming into being, namely the G7 friends of the Gulf of Guinea. It was a creation, a very singular one, within the context of the G7. So the 7, or previously, initially, the G8, the 7 most industrialized countries in the world, plus Russia. And then, of course, in 2014, following the expulsion of Russia from the G8, it became the G7 friends of the Gulf of Guinea. But the idea here was really to try and play with this traditional notion of territory and space. Countries which were far away from the Gulf of Guinea, that had no borders surrounding it, but at the same time had stakes in what was happening, saw it necessary to create an informal platform to try and tackle the issues and support the original region in itself. And so this was basically its mandate. But can we really talk about the G7 friends of Guinea as an instrument of the sort? And here, it's basically just my attempt to showcase that it meets most of the criteria, if not all. It's been composed by states, occasional ministerial participation. It has a common anti-piracy and regional capacity building aim. Non-binding declarations from the G7 have given quite a lot of support over the years for its existence, and it has no secretariat nor headquarters that truly resemble any kind of formal institutionalization. But this was just the beginning, right? So I wanted to see if this specific case study could tell us something about those three dimensions that I had identified for maritime informality. And so in terms of sustainability, this is actually very interesting because they decided that they needed to have this rotating co-chair system in order to provide some sort of sustainability to work procedures. But at the same time, but over the years, it became apparent that it was not enough to sustain itself. And therefore, a struggle within the members of this particular forum came to be, in which some were asking for some sort of in-between mechanism, some formal mechanism to step in and to ensure that the procedures would not be forgotten from one year to the other. And I think this is very interesting because it shows us the limits of informality. It's not as if it will solve everything, and it actually might create some new problems along the way. The second point would be the accountability. Informality means that we don't need to pick names or to register those who are actually participating in the meetings of this sort of institutions and mechanisms. And this, of course, gives the benefit of the doubt and allows discussions, decisions to be made in back rooms without the need for a lot of transparency. But of course, this also creates a lot of problems when you need to figure out who exactly is in favor of these mechanisms and who in fact is supporting this, the survival or the sustainability of these mechanisms. And here they pretty much accepted everyone who wanted to be part of this kind of procedures along the way. Australia, for example, was a part of the G7 back in 2016. It has since when it's gone its own way, but India became a full member in 2020, showcasing that in reality, this idea that one should stick by predetermined regional lines clearly did not hold true in terms of the G7 But at the same time, it also told us, or it showed that, or it became very difficult to figure out year after year who indeed was interested in still being a part of this sort of experiment. Again, the limits of informality, I believe, became very apparent. And lastly, contrary to what some would say, the G7 actually had some success in piercing through regional distrust. We're talking about a context which is marked or characterized by a lot of regional organizations, a lot of suspicions between a lot of regional actors. And they've actually been successful in bringing most parts to the same table. But at the same time, the fact that it is now facing competition with new also informal, but more operational mechanisms in the regions shows us that informality in itself is not a silver bullet to resolve or to take care of this kind of problems. So let me just end with a couple of open-ended conclusions about this. First and foremost, I think we are still struggling quite a lot with this kind of fine interpretations in terms of from the field, which have prevented us from exploring how international organizations can actually rework notions of territorial spatiality. We seem to be stuck in it, and I think it's particularly more evident when we add the maritime spin into it, because IR, for all intended purposes, has been a very Landluber discipline, meaning that it has always sort of not considered fully the limits or the potential of what a maritime experience might actually entail. Secondly, I believe, and I'm a true believer on this, but that this sort of informal experiments, which are very difficult to track and very difficult to map, but the fact that some of them might be based or might have specific maritime traits, those traits and those features might actually be exacerbated because we're talking about a maritime experience. And I propose, and I plan on continuing to do this work, that sustainability, accountability, and embeddedness might just be a framework for us to continue to explore the issue. And lastly, don't get me wrong, I'm not claiming that they are more effective, that they're more successful. I'm not saying that they are going to save us from the dire state of the world right now, and then suddenly we have to go informal. No. They are not better, they are not more successful, and they are not necessarily that distinct from land-based ones. But I do think that we are kidding ourselves if we don't pay enough attention to this sort of experiments, and that if we don't pay enough time or enough effort to try and see and unpack how the world really ticks and advances. And I believe this might be just one way to do it. And I'll stick with that. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Pedro, for kicking off the panel with some thought-provoking conceptions about what the maritime tells us of governance, of multilateralism, and how we move forward. Okay, so now we hear Homa Azodi's paper. She'll be presenting in French. Désinformation et technologies émergentes, construire un pont atlantique résilient. Homa's work has been evolving around precisely information management. She has had her master's degree in international studies at the University of Montreal, and she has been involved in a project about international analysis and the issues of the security and disinformation. So she'll be building on that work. La parole.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. C'est un plaisir de vous rejoindre aujourd'hui. Just starting, please excuse me if I cough or lose my voice. I hope I will keep it, but I might drink water. I also want to thank the forum for inviting me today. It's a pleasure to be here. And as mentioned, my topic today will be on disinformation, and I will present it in French. Donc, la désinformation et technologie émergente, construire un pont atlantique résilient, c'est le sujet de ma recherche. Pour commencer, en fait, le contexte et les objectifs de la présentation. Donc, pour commencer, ce qui est important à souligner, c'est qu'en période de crise, l'absence de repères fiables alimente un vide informationnel que des acteurs malveillants peuvent utiliser pour influencer l'opinion publique. Les trois principales sources de crise sont souvent la santé, les sources économiques aussi, les raisons économiques et les raisons identitaires. Ce phénomène fragilise le lien de confiance entre les citoyens et leurs institutions, compromettant l'autonomie politique des États et la cohésion démocratique. Dans l'espace transatlantique, La circulation d'informations représente tout à fois un levier qui est important de mettre de l'avant, mais aussi une vulnérabilité stratégique qui peut mener donc à la désinformation. L'objectif, plutôt les objectifs de cette présentation, c'est de promouvoir une collaboration transatlantique, donc entre l'Europe et des partenaires comme le Canada, souligner aussi l'importance de la résilience informationnelle, et non seulement des États, mais aussi des citoyens, et présenter des exemples de régulation, mais aussi des initiatives qui ont permis de promouvoir la stabilité des démocraties. Donc, l'agenda, c'est, d'abord, on va commencer avec expliquer c'est quoi la désinformation. Ensuite, je vais souligner la problématique. Par la suite, les limites de la régulation et du droit international. Et ensuite, donc, des exemples d'initiatives. Donc, pour commencer, justement, la désinformation, qu'est-ce que c'est exactement? C'est des informations fausses qui sont créées, diffusées dans une intention malveillante, qui visent à tromper un public et donc retirer un avantage financier, politique ou social. Ça se distingue de la mésinformation, qui est une information fausse qui est créée ou diffusée par erreur. Les attaques de désinformation spécifiquement par des partis d'extrême droite, partout dans le monde, ont explosé de plus de 250% depuis 2014, ce qui explique aussi pourquoi c'est aussi important d'en parler aujourd'hui. Mentionnons aussi que les désinformations sont liées à un manque de sources fiables et que les services et aussi les sphères numériques sont un terrain fertile, notamment Internet, par exemple. On mentionnait donc plutôt des facteurs que je vais aussi mentionner plus tard. La COVID-19, par exemple, est une crise liée à la santé qui s'est transformée en pandémie de la désinformation. Donc, je vais revenir sur ce sujet aussi. Vous allez voir sur la gauche que j'ai ajouté des tweets. Donc, vous connaissez bien évidemment Trump. Et peut-être aussi, j'imagine, Thierry Breton. Mais je vais vous présenter enfin une étude de cas spécifique. Donc, par rapport à l'étude, vous allez voir donc des acteurs clés. Thierry Breton, qui était récemment commissaire européen au marché intérieur. Il a aussi participé au Digital Services Act et au donc, Digital Markets Act. Et c'est un défenseur d'une souveraineté numérique européenne et d'une régulation stricte des plateformes. De l'autre côté, vous avez donc Elon Musk, que j'imagine que vous connaissez aussi, qui est un PDG de Tesla, de SpaceX, et qui est plutôt en faveur d'une vision large de la liberté d'expression qui est en conflit avec la régulation. L'échange que vous connaissez peut-être, qui est The Bird is Freed, a été fait sur Twitter. Donc, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? J'ai ajouté une minute du temps aussi pour clarifier l'information. Donc, en octobre 2022, Elon Musk venait de finaliser l'achat de Twitter. Puis, qu'est-ce qu'il a fait rapidement? C'est qu'il a retiré les règles de modération et il a tweeté par la suite « The bird is free », l'oiseau est libre. C'était une façon d'expliquer que Twitter était libéré des règles de modération qu'il jugeait excessives. Et c'est pas resté sans réponse, en fait. Comme vous pouvez imaginer, Thierry Breton, que vous avez vu plus tôt, a répondu, et il a dit « In Europe, the bird will fly by our rules ». En Europe, l'oiseau volera selon nos règles. Donc, vous pouvez voir que j'ai ajouté les échanges ici à la droite. C'est pas une simple répartie, c'est un message politique fort, à mon avis. Même si donc Elon Musk a essayé de changer les règles globales de Twitter, bon, il y a eu une opposition forte de l'Europe et donc qui est soutenue par un cadre légal, plus particulièrement le DSA, qui est le Digital Services Act, qui date de 2023. Le Digital Services Act que je viens de mentionner a été donc entré en vigueur en 2023. Ça impose une transparence des algorithmes et des décisions de modération, le retrait rapide des contenus illégaux, l'évaluation des risques pour la société et aussi des amendes jusqu'à 6% du chiffre d'affaires mondial en cas de non-respect. Pour ajouter donc au contexte, le tweet de Breton est aussi un rappel pour faire comprendre que ce qui se passe, donc aller à l'encontre d'une liberté en fait d'expression, mais qui respecte les autres, qui peut aller à l'encontre du respect des droits des autres, n'est pas respecté ailleurs. Puis, évidemment, il y a un échange, un aller-retour des deux côtés parce que Breton a éventuellement quitté son poste et Musk a réagi, et bon, parlé de régulation encore, puis a dit bon voyage, vous êtes parti maintenant. Puis Breton a répondu, ben moi j'ai quelques idées de régulation Mars aussi. Donc en comparaison des deux côtés, du côté de Breton, c'est plus une régulation donc démocratique qui va vers le respect des droits humains, une souveraineté numérique aussi, puis aussi c'est lié à la diplomatie aussi. Côté d'Elon Musk, c'était plus une question de liberté d'expression absolue, de modération minimale, puis voilà, donc de ne pas avoir de frontières, mais bon, surtout de ne pas avoir de limites. Par rapport au contexte, donc par rapport à l'information, où est-ce que ça se place aussi et à quoi on peut se référer. Donc, il y a un cadre juridique onusien sur l'information, mais aussi lié à la désinformation. L'objectif, c'est surtout de défendre les droits humains. Donc, vous allez voir plusieurs exemples de résolutions. Je ne vais pas toutes les nommer, mais soulignant rapidement le fait que ces résolutions visent à protéger les droits humains, les libertés fondamentales, liberté d'expression, oui, mais sans répandre de la désinformation, sans atteindre aux droits des autres. Et aussi limiter donc l'information qui est liée à la xénophobie, aux idées erronées et qui peuvent avoir des répercussions graves sur les droits de l'homme et donc des migrants aussi. Prochaine diapositive. Donc, j'ai mentionné le cadre onusien avec les résolutions, mais aussi donc un cadre lié à l'intelligence artificielle. C'est un sujet qui m'intéresse beaucoup. Je me suis surtout intéressée à des informations, mais tranquillement dans ma recherche, je m'intéresse aussi à l'intelligence artificielle. J'ai ajouté quelques exemples, en fait, de cadres liés à l'intelligence artificielle. Donc, j'ai mentionné plutôt l'ONU, donc il y a aussi une recommandation mondiale, il y a aussi AI for Good, le Conseil de sécurité aussi s'intéresse à l'intelligence artificielle. Côté de l'Union européenne, le Digital Services Act que j'ai mentionné. Et bon, si on parle aussi au côté national, je me suis concentrée du côté nord-américain parce que bon, voilà, je connais plus le côté nord-américain. Mais bon, les États-Unis ont un blueprint. Évidemment, il y a des changements et tout. Ça peut dépendre aussi de la personne, des personnes d'influence qui peuvent jouer avec ces règles. Mais du côté du Canada, moi, ça m'intéresse aussi la stratégie de l'intelligence artificielle qui a été lancée cette année, donc en mars. C'est pas récent, l'intérêt de l'intelligence artificielle à Montréal. On a eu une déclaration en 2018 des centres, le MILA qui est bien connu et d'autres. Et donc, on a un programme de soutien, de financement aussi pour faire la promotion de la recherche sur l'intelligence artificielle. La problématique, en fait, que je veux souligner aujourd'hui, c'est que l'environnement numérique est vulnérable à la désinformation. Le souci, c'est que l'essor rapide d'Internet est plus rapide que des normes ou des cadres qui sont juridiques et adaptés. Et ça fait en sorte que certains acteurs malveillants vont donc utiliser l'information, la manipuler, et ça peut donc avoir des perceptions sur des enjeux comme la migration, donc des droits humains, mais aussi sur la cohésion sociale. Par rapport à des données, pour vous mettre en contexte, l'Internet est évidemment utilisé par la plupart. La moitié de la population est connectée, puis surtout la jeunesse, plus de 70%. C'est facile et accessible, donc c'est un outil qui est facilement utilisable. Et le souci, c'est que puisque justement, il y a cette différence en fait entre l'accessibilité, la rapidité et un accord aussi ou un retour pour se mettre de même niveau, ça crée un vide normatif. Donc, le fait qu'il n'y a pas une régulation qui suit. Donc, c'est ce que je viens de mentionner justement, le fait que vous allez voir sur les diapositives que donc il y a, comment on dirait en anglais, un gap, une différence que j'appelle un vide informationnel. Et non seulement il y a des acteurs des désinformations qui sont souvent des personnes d'influence, comme Musk, comme Trump et comme beaucoup d'autres, mais aussi des propagateurs qui sont des intermédiaires et qui vont repartager cette information au public. Maintenant, je vais vous mentionner une étude de cas spécifique que je trouve pertinente et intéressante pour mettre en contexte aussi, quand je me suis vraiment posée sur la question au début, je me suis concentrée sur le phénomène migratoire, comment spécifiquement ça affecte les migrants, puis des populations qui sont marginalisées. Donc, dans l'étude de cas que vous pouvez voir ici, c'est en fait, c'est les Nations Unies qu'ils étaient alliés, si je me trompe pas, donc avec Reuters, justement. Et donc, en 2018, ils ont critiqué Facebook et ont dit que Facebook avait joué un rôle déterminant comme plateforme dans l'incitation à la violence génocidaire du peuple Rohingya. Pour mettre en contexte, le peuple Rohingya est un peuple marginalisé depuis très longtemps. Il se situe surtout au Myanmar, au Bangladesh et en Malaisie. Et le souci, en fait, c'est que la plateforme Facebook, en tant que telle, elle ne pensait pas qu'elle était coupable, mais c'était son système de modération, en fait, son algorithme qui n'arrivait pas à détecter les langues locales, donc les langues locales du Myanmar, du Bangladesh et de la Malaisie. Et le fait qu'il n'arrivait pas à détecter ces différences, ça faisait en sorte qu'il partageait l'information qui était populaire. Donc, que tous les posts, il les repartageait, il faisait en sorte que il y avait plus de visibilité. Et donc, ça alimentait l'hostilité par rapport à cette communauté. Et donc, comme mentionné, il y a eu une critique en fait des Nations Unies, donc suivant la recherche de Reuters, pour dire qu'en fait, il devrait avoir plus de surveillance et que c'était pas assez l'algorithme en tant que tel pour assurer la protection de la communauté. Un autre élément, en fait, qui était un peu intéressant dans ma recherche, c'est les facteurs de crise de confiance. Donc, qu'est-ce qui fait en sorte que la désinformation se propage encore plus? Ces facteurs, en fait, sont liés à la pyramide de Maslow. Donc, c'est lié à la hiérarchie des besoins. Souvent, les besoins physiologiques, donc qui sont à la base, viennent avant des besoins psychologiques comme l'identité. Donc, vous allez voir à gauche que j'ai mis les 3 principales causes, donc les 3 principaux facteurs. Vous avez les crises sanitaires qui sont liées à la santé. Donc, ça, c'est dans la pyramide, c'est un besoin de base. J'ai ajouté des exemples. Vous avez donc la COVID-19 que j'ai mentionné plus tôt, qui est un facteur qui a augmenté la désinformation, mais à un point assez extrême. Vous avez ensuite les crises économiques. Donc, tout ce qui est lié à l'argent, c'est aussi un besoin essentiel parce qu'on a besoin d'argent souvent pour vivre. Donc, les dettes, chômage vont aussi augmenter la désinformation. Et ensuite, crise identitaire, ça vient et ça part. C'est souvent lié donc à une polarisation, un conflit de valeurs. Et important de mentionner que l'un n'exclut pas l'autre. C'est lié. Ils peuvent arriver en même temps aussi. Puis, j'ai ajouté des exemples. Donc, je vais mentionner une étude de cas ensuite, mais pour passer rapidement sur l'exemple, donc, une étude de l'Université Cornell a montré que Donald Trump était aussi, encore une fois, un facteur principal de désinformation lié à la COVID-19. Il était présent dans la majorité des articles analysés. Des campagnes de désinformation aussi ont été coordonnées par la Russie et la Chine pour semer la méfiance contre les autorités sanitaires occidentales. Donc, c'est pas seulement un État, ça peut être plusieurs États, c'est souvent des personnes qui ont de l'influence. Et donc, ça, c'est une brève parenthèse, mais je vais vous présenter une étude de cas que je trouve assez intéressante. Donc, comme mentionné, au niveau de la pyramide de Maslow, les crises, en fait, liées à la santé, sont majoritaires. C'est ça qui cause encore plus de désinformation. Puis, j'ai comme mentionné, dans mon étude, c'était surtout lié aux migrants. Mais les migrants, en fait, dans la plupart des articles, ont été accusés de plusieurs choses. Ils ont été accusés, par exemple, dans plusieurs articles, c'est des articles journalistiques, en fait, causer une vague de COVID. Il y avait des photos d'eux dans des journaux qui montraient qu'ils étaient proches dans les rassemblements, alors que, en fait, ça respectait les distances. Le tiers des articles aussi mentionnaient qu'ils avaient un accès préférentiel au système de santé. Beaucoup d'articles aussi mentionnaient qu'ils avaient des attitudes criminelles et pendant la pandémie. Donc, vous pouvez voir qu'il y a eu une représentation médiatique négative qui a augmenté. Vous pouvez voir tous les pourcentages. Et c'était surtout lié donc à la crise sanitaire. Et j'ai ajouté des titres d'articles juste en bas pour que vous voyez les exemples, en fait, de ce qui s'est dit, comment ça a été présenté de façon assez choc dans les médias. Au niveau de l'économie, je vois que j'ai quand même écrit beaucoup de textes, je vais essayer de les résumer, mais qu'est-ce qui s'est passé, c'est qu'ils disent qu'en fait, selon selon le contexte, selon en fait l'endroit, la position dans le monde, il peut avoir une conséquence directe. En fait, par position, qu'est-ce que je veux dire, c'est que proche de la Méditerranée, par exemple, il y a plus de migration et ça fait en sorte que l'Italie et l'Espagne, en fait, ils ont été confrontés à un plus grand taux d'immigration et ils ont été aussi plus, disons, susceptibles à réagir. Donc, l'exemple que j'ai ajouté, c'est lié à la coalition de droite de Mélanie et les médias hyper-partisans. En fait, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont dit en 2022? C'est qu'ils ont dit aux ONG d'arrêter, on devait de limiter les débarquements des migrants parce que, ça causait des problèmes à leur avis. Ils voulaient pas, en fait, ils ont clairement dit que c'était pas clairement de facto un service de taxi. Que les migrants allaient importer le virus, qu'ils étaient aussi la cause des problèmes économiques. Donc là, vous pouvez voir encore crise sanitaire, facteurs économiques, plusieurs éléments, facteurs ensemble. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'ils ont fait en fait, c'est que ils ont limité les bateaux de sauvetage et la France en fait a dû secourir un bateau spécifiquement, a dû secourir des migrants à la place de l'Italie. L'Italie en fait est contrevenue à la Convention des Nations Unies sur le droit de la mer, qui exige que chaque État doit sauver les navires en fait qui sont dans son territoire. La France a dû le faire à sa place. Donc, vous pouvez voir à quel point ça peut devenir extrême et ça peut en fait causer des dangers au niveau des droits humains. Donc, dans ce cas-ci, des migrants. Ensuite, niveau identitaire, l'identité, disons, dans certains pays d'Europe de l'Est comme la République tchèque, de façon générale, c'est un sujet principal, souvent 60% des articles. En fait, donc, qu'est-ce qu'on voit aussi, c'est que, encore une fois, si on fait le contraste avec des pays plus d'Europe du Sud, donc l'Espagne, l'Italie, moins de lien avec le cadre identitaire, mais plus dans ce cas-ci, donc, comme mentionné, avec économique et sanitaire, en fait, surtout ces dernières années, quand j'ai fait la recherche. C'est ça, donc de façon générale, l'Europe centrale de l'Est est plus liée aux crises identitaires qu'autres types de crises. J'ai aussi donc mentionné plusieurs cas théoriques que j'ai utilisés pendant ma recherche. Donc, le vide normatif que j'ai mentionné plus tôt, le fait que sans repères fiables, il y a un vide d'information qui fait une promotion de la désinformation, qui cause un contexte plus propice à la désinformation. Donc, des acteurs peuvent utiliser ça pour leurs intérêts. Il y a aussi le phénomène de constructivisme, le fait qu'on construit une réalité, on change la réalité de façon, disons, intentionnelle. Aussi, la théorie de l'intermittence complexe, le fait que l'information de façon générale, c'est un bien commun, mais plusieurs facteurs peuvent faire en sorte que plus de désinformation aussi, des préjugés, une exposition, un environnement politique, disons, particulier de droite ou d'extrême gauche, marché publicitaire, des réseaux sociaux, donc il y a des facteurs aussi qui sont liés. Et aussi la sécurisation, donc le fait que les crises, les facteurs que j'ai mentionnés sont comme des causes, des façons de justifier en fait pourquoi il y a une situation qui est inconfortable ou pourquoi est-ce que il y a des problèmes en fait dans une société. Voilà, donc j'arrive presque à la fin. Pour mentionner en fait ce qui est intéressant aussi, c'est des chercheurs aussi qui ont mentionné ça et que je pensais que ça serait important de souligner, c'est qu'au niveau de comment renforcer la résilience de la société face à la désinformation, ce qui est important, c'est que c'est pas seulement en fait le passé qui influence. Oui, ça influence, mais c'est possible en fait de changer une opinion en prenant le temps vraiment de promotion, de faire une promotion de l'information juste et de renforcer en fait l'habilité des gens à reconnaître l'information qui est véritable. Donc, des initiatives de sensibilisation, il y a Verify des Nations Unies qui a engagé les citoyens en fait à des messagers dans leur propre communauté, plutôt du côté de l'Amérique du Sud, donc du côté des Amériques et le Costa Rica aussi, qui a fait un phénomène de bouche à oreille. Qu'est-ce qui est intéressant, c'est que justement ce phénomène de sensibilisation à l'information juste, c'est très efficace au niveau local, plus qu'au niveau national. Justement, il souligne que c'est comme ça que ça devrait être fait pour intégrer les citoyens aussi. Sinon, une autre stratégie pour favoriser la résilience citoyenne, en fait, c'est des prix, c'est favoriser les journaux aussi, faire en sorte qu'il y ait des prix spécifiquement, par exemple, l'OIM, l'Organisation internationale de migration, a des prix spécifiquement pour la reconnaissance du travail des journalistes qui couvrent la migration qui est liée aux droits de l'homme. Donc, c'est des exemples, des pistes, en fait, de façon de lutter contre la désinformation. J'ai ajouté une quote, une citation de Antonio Guterres, qui est secrétaire général des Nations Unies. La lutte contre la désinformation nécessite des investissements durables dans le renforcement de la résilience de la société et de la maîtrise des médias et de l'information. Donc, pour conclure, la désinformation amplifie les préjugés existants et est fondée sur des structures de pouvoir et d'influence dans la communication. Et il est temps pour les États de renforcer des cadres sur la désinformation, mais surtout d'avoir des efforts coordonnés pour que, du côté européen, mais aussi du côté américain, il y ait une collaboration, de l'information qui est partagée et qui peuvent répondre à des conséquences qui sont bien réelles. Donc, je pense qu'une solution durable serait justement d'avoir une collaboration transatlantique au niveau de l'information et aussi donc de l'accès à l'information. Merci beaucoup.
We move forward now. We've had informality, we have disinformation, and now we move on to Celine Rodrigues' paper on blue humanities, a wet ontology and ice humanities. So let's see what Celine means by this. Just a brief note on Celine's biography. She's a PhD candidate in international relations at Universidade Nova de Lisboa, with a focus on the North Atlantic and Arctic basins, and she's working on the human security of Inuit and Sami people in Canada and Finland, comparing Arctic policies, and she's also currently developing a series of initiatives on these wet ontologies and ocean perspectives that she's been developing here in Portugal. So stay tuned to all the wonderful initiatives that she's promoting. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's on. Now it is. Okay, thank you very much. It was my previous research at the master, and now it is the connection of the Atlantic and Arctic basins, so maritime security and human security challenges in both areas, and Portugal in the Arctic, with the scenario thinking.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. So, yes, before I start talking, yes.
It's, okay.
Yeah, I know. I just want to... Suspense. Sorry. Okay. There is something that should be working here, so, but it's not. It's not.
Animation?
Yeah. No, we do it a different way, no problem. Just a little discount on time, please, if you don't mind. Just, yeah. No, it's not being able to work well with technologies. So no issue, no problem. What's that?
This is what you're seeing right now?
No, but there's something that should be on. And it's not. Okay, no, not this. This is strange. I'm sorry, but it will work. So please, stay with us. It is the last session and the last presentation, so. Okay. Now we should be able to.
Ode to the Sea. Here, surrounding the island, there's sea. But what sea? It's always overflowing. Says yes, then no again, and no. Says yes in blue, in sea spray raging. Says no, and no again. It can't be still. It stammers, my name is sea. It slaps the rocks, and when they aren't convinced, strokes them and soaks them and smothers them with kisses, with 7 green tongues of 7 green dogs, or 7 green tigers, or 7 green seas, beating its chest, stammering its name. O sea, this is your name. O comrade ocean, don't waste time or water getting so upset. Help us instead. We're meager fishermen, men from the shore. We're hungry and cold, and you're our foe. Don't beat so hard, don't shout so loud. Open your green coffers, place gifts of silver in our hands. Give us this day our daily fish.
You are still able to listen to me for the rest of the presentation, and I think that it would be okay for the organizers too. So, okay, so now let's move on to the presentation. Okay, perfect. So, yes, it's a bit difficult today to work on, but it's okay. Keep calm. Yeah, I'm trying to, but yeah, something is not okay, but oh, fine. Well, it's just because I'm not seeing it here, but bonjour, good afternoon, buenas tardes y boa tarde. I'm trying to close this and see my presentation here. I would need some help. Okay, I think now it's okay. That's fine, okay. Perfect. Thank you very much. So again, bonjour, good afternoon, buenas tardes y boa tarde. So I hope that if you feel like dancing, please feel free. And try not to bet already on what type of fish we will have for dinner. Just wait a little bit more. At the end of the presentation, you will be able to think about that. But for now, please, let's support ourselves, because this is the last session and the last presentation of today and of the wonderful conference that we have been able to interact in and with each other today and yesterday. So I hope that you will enjoy this presentation. Okay, so as you have heard, it was an ode to the sea, and we are in an island, and so obviously it means that the element and the global commons that we are talking about is the ocean. But when we look at the timeline that you see here, and I divided it in 2 slides because I want to connect it to climate change, as it was only in the 20th century that there was this growing awareness and consciousness regarding the importance of climate change, despite climate studies since 19th century. And we are still having, and linking to what Homa also said about disinformation and misinformation, we are unfortunately living some issues regarding what is happening with climate change. And I just want a little note here about the sea and the ocean. As you can see in this timeline, the only mention that I included is a book from Rachel Carson, The Sea Around Us, that is dated from 1951. And I could add also a prior one that is Under the Sea, where it also explains the relation, the human and non-human relation with the sea and water and the ocean. Because we're here in an island, and when we will go back home, I am sure that many of us will want to have something, not only from the island, but something that can remind you from the ocean and the connection that subconsciously we know that we have, right? Because life comes from water, from the ocean. So it is interesting to see that in international relations and at its inception, nature was part of this field, and it has lost its importance throughout history. So the second part of the timeline brings the attention to the ocean, and it is considered that Portugal had some positive practical impact because it is considered that the ocean entered the international agenda, the global agenda in 1998, so right before entering the 21st century. And what we see is that over the decades, there is indeed a growing interest in what concerns the ocean, its importance at many levels, and I will add also most recently in what concerns cryosphere. That is a new word that is part of the vocabulary and of new many reports that have been also published. So what we see is that there is also, and thanks to probably some scientists like Johan Rockström, that has been able to explain the importance and how the elements, as it has been also explained in the previous panel, that everything is connected. And if one element breaks down, then all of the elements will also break down like a domino effect. And so it is relevant that we understand how everything is interconnected and connected, and we are also impacted by all the changes that we are witnessing. So I hope that you will get ready to surf. So let's imagine that we are outside and we just have the ocean right there. And so we will surf the first wave onto Blue Humanities. And we will discover what it is, obviously. And then we will take on a second wave. And don't worry, there's no sci-fi effect here. You won't get wet. It won't start raining. You don't have to open your umbrella. And we will surf on wet ontology. And then a last wave that would be ice humanities. But here we will have to link to other humanities that are the cryo and the Arctic. And obviously, I will tell you that later on. So let's start with Blue Humanities. So it is considered that it is coined by the author Steve Mentz in 2009, but the truth is that the first time that this expression was used was by the Turkish author. I will not try to say his name, I'm sorry, I don't want to spell it wrongly, but it was in the 40s of last century. And so it is considered that, well, it brings the sea as a symbolic domain, and it has influence by the Anthropocene seas. It is also social practices, cultural forces, and geopolitical agency. But yes, it means also that it is possible to combine various fields of studies. And for example, we can be environmental studies, oceanography, and we have here Sylvia Earle, a very important oceanographer that has been also advocating for the preservation of the Central Arctic Ocean within the organization Global Choices. And it can be also marine biology, Atlantic history, ecology, maritime history. And I think that somehow it relates to many of the topics and many of the fields of expertise of many of you in this room that we have been sharing and listening to each other these 2 days. But the author considers that it is important to deepen a little bit more the meaning of Blue Humanities in the new context we are living in. And we are in the middle of the Atlantic, and I think that it is pretty clear now at the end of the second day of this conference that it is not only about the Atlantic anymore. As the statement says, it is going beyond the Atlantic. And I can relate it also to what the historian David Armitage also says about the Atlantic. The Atlantic that is seen obviously as the way to present a first globalization. By the way, there is an expression that Steve Mance uses that is wet globalization, because it was via the Atlantic and via water that we were able to globalize. And at the same time, it brings also something that it seems nobody really thought about, but ocean is water, obviously, but where else do we have water? And he says that it should include rivers, lakes, glaciers, and other forms of water, because they can be clouds or vapor. So when we think about water, there's so many places where we have water. Obviously, we say that we live on Earth, and this is a very terrestrial way of looking at the planet, because we know that more than 70% of the Earth's surface is water. So it should be the blue planet. This is how we call it also, right? The blue planet. So it is really interesting to see this evolution of the authors regarding their own concept and ideas about what is going on in the 21st century, and how, in this case, it is possible also to connect to, again, Johan Rockström, that considers that we should not be talking about global commons anymore, but instead we should use the expression planetary commons, right? So this is very different in the 21st century. So now, please take on the next wave. Let's get wet in the wet ontology, and this time with Kimberly Peters and Philip Steinberg. And what do they mean by that? It means that it is a different way of thinking the world, right? If you think about wet, water gets us wet. And so we need to really think from a different perspective, look at the ocean in a different way, look at water in a different way, and think with water, right? Because it is also, and it, as it says in the sentence here, it opens new frames for thinking geographically. But again, those authors considered that we need to go a little bit more in depth in what it means, wet ontology. And so they consider that the expression should be now more than wet ontology. And again, just as Steve Mance referred to the other ways and other places of water, Peters and Steinberg consider that we should consider also water not only in its liquid state, but also in its solid state. It means bringing up the ice, right? Because it's not only in the lakes, ocean, and rivers that we have water. It is liquid, it's true, but it can be also in other states, solid, just like the glaciers, or it can be vapor, like gas. So these authors match each other in their ideas and the concepts and evolution of those concepts. So please, now we continue our journey and our training, surfing out there, and we are going a little bit up north, and if you get cold, well, don't worry, it won't be for a long time. And we will now be entering what is known as ice humanities. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, before stepping into the meaning of ice humanities, an expression that is coined by Sever Sorling, Swedish scholar, he considers that first we need to look at the cryohistory. And cryo from cryosphere, this is a Greek word that comes from kryos, it means cold. And as I mentioned, it is a word that is becoming a little bit more familiar, even within social sciences, when it comes to those topics. And it was coined in 1923, so a century ago. And it means, and it looks like it is a new word when it's not. And so it is also related to the connection of the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and atmosphere. And I will explain how this is also important a little bit later. So because we are in the ice, please, you have tried to pick up your first portion of ice with prior history. And now please try to take on your second portion on Arctic humanities. So in this context, and according to the same author, so those two expressions are coined by the Swedish scholar Sverker Sorling in different books. He considers that it was the fourth international polar year that somehow alerted the scientists, researchers, or academics from social sciences and humanities to really think about the planetary crisis that is connected to climate change and obviously also links to geopolitics at a global level. So everything is connected. And so it also matches and confirms what he thought previously with the prior history. That is, there are changes that can be offered in the new perspective that social and humanities can bring into those topics. This is why it is relevant for social and humanities to understand the importance of ice humanities. And in this case, he joined the British author Klaus Stotz in order to explain this expression, because now it is considered that ice is indeed an object of study, it is an environmental object, and it is an essential element in life diversity. And we should also say that it is included in the social aspect of those living in the Arctic region, because it is part of the way of life of not only the indigenous communities, but also of those living in what is the Arctic region. And with that, it is possible then to investigate life on and with ice. And again, it means that just as with the wet ontology and the blue humanities, it is expected that you have a shift in the way of thinking about the ocean or in thinking about water. Here, it is expected that you can have the same kind of shift and to think with the ice. And this is something that is also very important nowadays, because it brings again the possibility of combining different kinds of research and field of studies together. For example, in this case, the author considers that it can be science and technology, history, geography, glaciology, maritime, and polar studies, just to name a few. And because this panel is also about security, I included here the word security because, and as Homa mentioned in her presentation, the Copenhagen School, so for those of you who are familiar with this, it is a school from the international relations, and one of the authors, or Weaver, is the editor of a book that was published last year, entitled Greenland in Arctic Security. And in one of those chapters, the authors considered that it is time to maybe consider ice as a security issue. And why is that? Because it has an impact on the ocean, it has an impact on the atmosphere, and it has an impact worldwide. So there are three key elements where the ice is having a probably negative impact, as we know, because marine environment is being affected, as we know, and obviously the ocean being affected not only by the sea level rise, but everything that is happening inside the marine life, the marine environment, is also linked and intertwined to what happens on land. And obviously, it impacts us as human beings. So it is also important to understand those kind of connections. And so I'm sure that by now you have been able to come up with the conclusion that those concepts, what they have in common is that they are multi and interdisciplinary. And it is important to not only bring together the social sciences, but also the natural sciences all together. So we are able to, all of us, think differently. And maybe some might think that it challenges the traditional thoughts and habits. Probably, yes, but something really has to change. It is necessary to think with the ocean, to think with water, to think with ice, and to understand, as those authors have affirmed in their research, that is non-stop research. As you can see, it is always adapting and evolving. It means that we need to look at water in its different states, liquid and solid. And to finish, I need the sea because it teaches me. I don't know if I learn music or awareness, if it's a single wave or it's a vast existence, only its harsh voice of its shining suggestion of fishes and ships. The fact is that until I fall asleep in some magnetic way, I move in the university of the waves. It's not simply the shells crunched as if some shivering planet were giving signs of its gradual death. No, I reconstruct the day out of a fragment, the stalactite from the silver of salt, and the great God out of a spoonful. What he taught me before, I keep. It's air, scissors wind, water and sand. It seems a small thing for a young person to have come here to live with his own fire. Nevertheless, the pulse that rose and fell in its abyss, the cracking of the blue cold, the gradual wearing away of the star, the soft unfolding of the wave, squandering snow with its foam, the quiet power out there, sure as a stone shrine in the depth, replaced my word in which were growing stubborn sorrow, gathering oblivion, and my life changed suddenly as I became part of its pure movement. Thank you, merci, gracias.
Thank you so much, Celine, not only for bringing poetry to our afternoon and kind of inspiring us to also look at our environment. Can I just ask you to switch off? Yeah, perfect. Also inviting us to look at the environment around us in a way that makes us more or differently inclined to read the environment and how it can talk to us. We still have some time for Q&A, so what I'm going to do is ask you to please raise your questions, your comments. I'll collect all of them. I'll ask the authors to take notes, and then I'll just give the floor back to our presenters for final comments and questions. I know everyone is kind of tired, but I'm sure you are. You have some inspiration from these presentations. Go ahead, Tume. We need a microphone over there, yeah.
So for Homa, and on this information, I'm sure you expect this question. I enjoyed the bits about how to create resilience in society. What about AI imagery? So can you educate people to tell apart a fake AI image from from a real image? And last time I saw someone ask Sam Altman about this, or one of the great AI luminaries, he said that maybe our concept of reality needs to stretch a bit. That's what he answered. So for the others, very quickly, because I think I have some room here. So for Pedro Seabra, I was thinking about the coalition of the willing. Can maybe we get lessons from your work to this, although it's not a maritime, or not, it may be maritime, but maybe not scenario. And then for Celine, as you were talking about our conceptions of the icy world, I was thinking about the Soviet idea of conquering nature by sending our Soviet explorers and to conquer the Arctic. So as we get now a different geopolitical environment in the Arctic, are we in danger of having this kind of idea, extractive and conquering of nature, return? Or can we get some corrective from your ice humanities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. more questions or comments on the presentations? Yes, while you're thinking about the next questions, I have perhaps a couple of comments. I'm going to start in reverse order. Celine, I'm always, I think it's hard for us to sometimes imagine how we can relate to water. We've discussed how water, social sciences are much more related to the earth and the environment where humans are physically present. And if you think of water in different stages than the liquid one, I think it's even harder to relate to that. So what sort of difficulties have you encountered in kind of making the case that, besides the environmental one? Because I think the environmental one is where we immediately understand that water in any shape or stage needs to be relevant. But besides the environmental one, how do other forms of relation with these different stages of water have kind of come to fruition in terms of the social sciences and humanities, as you proposed? And also on the bit of security, and linking this to Sandra's presentation early on, the melting of the ice on the Arctic, is it good or bad? Because you raised the issue of security. But whose security are we talking about? Because I think for some countries, it's not melting fast enough. For some actors, it's not melting fast enough. We could already have a nice maritime route there, and it's taking forever. Whereas from a climate change and climate preservation perspective, we think that our common security is, of course, being challenged by this abrupt change in the levels of ice that we have. So when we talk about ice melting and security, I think kind of making it clear whose security we are talking about may be, of course, very relevant. Homa, I was very much, it's a comment rather than a question, very much interested to see how you kind of brought your conclusions on this information to the issue of Maslow's pyramid of needs, and how identity is an issue that is more easily raised and of concern to people where the social economic levels are higher. So I'm guessing this is not a surprise, but I really wanted to highlight how difficult it is to have an integrated conversation about all these threats and how they are interrelated, and how I think the numerical giants are very much aware of these things and also kind of playing with that. But maybe you can let us know more of whether this is just an impression or is something that is actually, we can actually prove that is happening. Pedro, I think we've talked about this issue of informality, and I'm of the opinion that in a fast-changing environment, informality may be a way to kickstart at least some level of cooperation on issues that are just emerging and new, and you need some way to get people around the table who are interested and actually don't need to wait for others who may take longer to move ahead. So I'm guessing you can see the value of this, but how can we move then forward from this stage of early interest and actually being able to tackle new issues to then making it more sustainable and actually producing long-term effects that speak to the more traditional institutions or kind of connect to the more traditional institutions? I was also discussing with our colleague who presented on Micronesia about earlier on how informality is also a way for poorer countries to be able to actually participate in more multilateral forums and benefit from that, because the costs of actually setting up a formal international organization are very high, or actually participating in them are very high. So I was wondering if you think that there is room there for using actually both and making the best of this world. And in terms of the maritime domain, can we consider that the maritime domain is so different that it's going to shape multilateral cooperation differently as well, or you haven't come that far? Okay, that's my questions. Last opportunity. Yep, over there.
I'm sorry, just to be quick. Thank you to the three presentations. I have three quick questions for Homa, because I really like your research themes. It's one of the themes that interests me the most at the moment. And so, you in your misinformation treatment, you addressed the trust as a main thing, and you addressed from, if I remember well, from health perspective, with the pandemic and the migrations example, economic factors, and also the identity issues. I was wondering if you see some potential of addressing also the trust in the democratic institutions, if it is something that you are considering or not. My second question is about the use cases that you've mentioned. The power agents use misinformation to somehow manipulate the opinion or the tendency. I was wondering if somehow the opposite could be possible. I mean, if we can use misinformation to manipulate the power agents, especially if these power agents use the same tools to manipulate elsewhere. If a power agent can instate that their own truth or their own facts are real, if actually it's possible for misinformation to manipulate those power agents. And there, that's it. Thank you.
Any more questions or comments? Okay, so I'm gonna come back to the table in reverse order. Celine, you want to start? Yeah.
Okay, sure. So thank you for all the questions. I will try to bring one single answer to try to answer to everyone. So I think that nature doesn't really care about humankind. So the problem is that we have not been able to really understand until recently that everything is connected and that we are also part of the ecosystem. And this is written in the Convention of Biological Diversity, dated from 1992. So the thing is that we don't want to accept it because, as many philosophers say, and even one of the authors of Green Theory, what they mention is that humans always have this idea that they are superior in the hierarchy, placing themselves at a higher level than nature. And this is a wrong way of looking at what is happening nowadays. So when it comes to the matter of Russia, I don't think that they understand. I mean, let's say it in a different way. They can use nature in their profit and using it from a power perspective. As we know, they are willing to have the ocean. They are willing to be a maritime power, maybe as Spanish and Portuguese were in the 15th and 16th century, if you can say it that way. So they know that they have an opportunity from their perspective to use the ocean into their benefit. That's their perspective. And again, nature has always been seen as something that we are afraid of. And the French philosopher Terrasson has a book entitled La peur de la nature, being afraid of nature, because this is also how we have been raised and how religion also taught us to look at nature instead of really understanding how it works. This is what we have been missing. And again, the scientists like Johan Rockström and even Stefan Rahmstorff, that is working on the AMOC, that is the Atlantic Meridional Ocean Circulation, admits that even for him, it took a long time to understand that this is an important element when it comes to the ocean. And the recent studies show that probably we have the AMOC collapsing in our lifetime, what is bad because it means that then the Arctic will freeze again, and then we will have obviously harsh winters and summers, even in Europe. So unless we are willing to really shift our minds and look at nature, not in the way of protecting it, because we are the ones who need protection from it. We are not stronger enough to really fight against climate change or nature. We really need to understand how it works. And this is why tipping elements and tipping points are so important also for social sciences to understand. And when we talk about the Arctic region from the geopolitical perspective, it is also a consequence of what is happening with climate change. So it is pretty clear we need to look at this bigger image. And in relation of social sciences and more specifically international relations, if we want to match nature and security and to really go back to the inception of the meanings and the studies of security and international relation, what we see is that they were both linked. There was this interest and recognition of the importance of nature, and at the same time, security was something that was also linked to nature. It was an inner state of peace. It had a different meaning that it has today. We always think about security, about fighting each other and weapons, and it was a very completely different concept back then. And yes, connecting the ice and security, well, it means that it is planet security, it is humankind security. We are all at risk because we have seen that even in the Azores last year, if I can remember, after we left the conference, there was this information that some kinds of a specific fish species died due to the very high temperature here in the Azores, in the water of the ocean. So this is a signal that if things keep going the way they are, then we are all at risk because...
But it's hard to have a specific agent acting on behalf of humanity, whereas for a state...
It's difficult to have a specific agent acting on behalf of humanity. A state, you have a democratically elected or self-appointed, doesn't matter, a government with a mandate, right? And that government's going to say, it's very important for me to just break the ice in the Arctic and we'll be more powerful because of that. And everyone, yay, likes that. Well, but who speaks in behalf of humanity, right? I think we're at that point.
Yeah. That's why it is important to look at the region, not only at only the regional level, but at the global level. And this is something that even the Arctic states need to really understand, that it is not their backyard anymore. It is really something that has an impact. And there is this sentence that is already well known, that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And why is that? Because the climate change that is affecting the region is having a very different impact in many different parts of the world. And there are studies in China and India that are, and even in Brazil, that are connecting what is happening with the monsoon period in the Amazon, connecting it to the Arctic region, how it is really impacting them. And so it has to be really something at the global level that has been really difficult. And obviously at the regional level, also the Arctic state and Russia, and as it was mentioned, also China, and we don't really know about the United States, but the thing is that they look at the Arctic region with an ocean that is free of ice to only extract what it can give them. But there is so much more stake than just thinking about all the elements that are down there, the ocean, or the Arctic Ocean in this case.
Well, first, I want to say that these questions are great. Thank you so much for taking the time to ask them. I will try to be quick and give my answers. So, first, regarding AI imaginary. So, I find it interesting how like the reality can be, the way you said, stretched. And I think it is true. AI is not, it's not something new. It has been existing for decades now, but we are starting to understand it. We have new strategies. I mentioned in Canada, we have a new strategy that dates this year. So we're trying to understanding it. But I think something that we need to highlight is there's good to it and there's bad to it. For example, AI is used in the health system. So, for example, in some hospitals, they link the patient to the hospital directly, and that's possible through AI. Other things, I'm working on a project actually because I'm also involved in international assistance, and we're trying to link the work system to marginalized community, and that's possible through, again, AI. Only thing is, AI, it's also something that we mentioned in a previous panel today, which was to me super interesting. We can't necessarily control it. It's difficult to control a source of information that's, you can't always know where it's from. And if you know, how exactly can you be sure, or how can you have your influence on it? So it's tricky. I think most important is to learn how to read AI. I think something in parallel with what I was saying. So disinformation is happening, but most importantly, access to information is in parallel crucial. So I think that we need to learn how to read AI, not only AI specialists or people in centers that are researching the topic, but also common people, because it's going to be accessible to everyone. So yeah, expanding realities, but it's mostly expanding realities of people, I'd say, about the topic would be useful. So that's the first answer I wanted to give. Then regarding identity, the fact that in certain countries, in terms of the crisis, well, it's more linked to identity instead of health or economy. So as mentioned, because of the pyramid, so the primal needs, the first needs are usually things that we can control, that we really need. And that's why when there's more worries, because of multiple reasons, in the case of my study was migrations, because there was such an amount of migration and it was not done in a manner that was, well managed. And there was also this fear of migrants because there were so many, that it linked the fear directly to the first two crises I mentioned. So I think that what is important here again about this is to, there's differences, yes. I still need to do more studies about this, to be honest. I'm also trying to understand what's all the links. Also, I did some research about this topic in Europe, but what about other countries? So, the Americas, for example. So I'd say, yes, that's what I observed. It would be also, I think, interesting to see how intermediaries are linked. So not only state actors, so extreme groups that have influence, but how other voices have influence in how these factors are, let's say, influential. So good question to be thought about. Then third question about disinformation, the trust in democratic institutions. Yes, I think that what happens, is that disinformation creates a distrust in democratic institutions. The thing is, I think it's also on the behalf of states to be able to be able to show that they care and that they want to provide information. When we mentioned the example, well, that's more on a European level, but let's say there's a framework on information, on AI. If there is a framework, usually you're able to refer to it. But in the US, there were updates. So there was a specific bill that I included, but obviously if there's actors that change that or like vehicle another message, well, how can the people trust that? So I think most importantly is to have a coherent message at the national level. so that people can trust institutions. And I think it goes both ways in that matter. And finally, the last question about how power agents can use the opinion. So how they can use this information to influence power. So that's a very, very good question. I think that civilians, if we're talking about these people as power agents, only thing is that they don't have as much influence as someone like Elon Musk, for example, someone that has not only the notoriety but also the how to say it, the resources, that has, the connections, that has a voice, unfortunately, that other civilians do not have. So that's why they can also spread disinformation, because they don't have much to lose. It will not necessarily affect them, but will still live on and say whatever they have to say. Civilians that would do that would, I think, face more important consequences. So I think that's what I would say. But all over great questions, and myself, I'm also looking forward to continue to research on this topic, especially AI, because I did disinformation, but to me, AI is the future. Thank you.
All right. Very quickly, thank you both. So very quickly on Jaman's question, actually no. So this is a big issue in the discussion over informal intergovernmental organizations, because they claim, or their proponents claim, that coalitions are not institutionalized enough to actually be considered something akin to institutions, and so they tend to put them aside and not account them in this sort of mapping exercises. But again, I have to emphasize that we're talking about ideal type definitions, right? So, and they are the ones also, they're the first ones to also warn that we are playing with ideal types. Hence, there'll be always different kind of experiments that we have to try and see if they actually fit the bill. And actually, the G7++ is a very curious experiment, because there's a lot of literature on groups of friends and contact groups. And the G7++ is neither. It has the name, or it has taken up the mantle of a group of friends, but usually groups of friends are within the UN framework. It's more akin to a contact group, but it doesn't claim to be one. So that's why I've actually always found it puzzling, and that's why I think it's actually a very good case study to study this kind of dynamics. But very quickly on Licínia's point, I was hoping to get your take on this. And yeah, I think there's a lot of positives to going informal, for sure. It's faster, it's nimble, it doesn't take a lot to set up together. But I think it's not all that definitive from the start, right? Some things will remain informal over time, and there are a lot of experiments, like decades of survival, that still remain informal. Some will go formal, like the Nile Basin Initiative actually signed a comprehensive framework in 2010. And if all the members had already signed and ratified, we would be considering an actual formal organization. And some will just go away and fade away into the multilateral graveyard of the world, which we have quite a lot of examples. In terms of the costs of formality, you're right. I mean, or the costs behind it all, right? I mean, who bears the costs of informality? But actually, one of these databases, they actually go to the effort of mapping out the countries behind who makes up this kind of informal experiments. And they've actually found that it is the group of G20 countries which are the most significant joiners of informal IOs.
It's not an economic issue.
It's not an economic. They want less accountability, less transparency. They don't want to be constrained by this formal binding rules. They want to be able to juggle and have leeway in terms of what they discuss. And you actually see, of course, this is not a definitive mapping. I'm sure there are a lot of informal experiments that we are missing thus far, but it does tell us something, that it's not just about the costs behind it all. And lastly, is the maritime issue or trade different at all? I don't think so. I actually just came up with this definition, I actually think it's an accelerator, but not a differentiator in itself. It heightens issues of informality, but it doesn't make it that different from other experiments of the kind. For me, at the very least, that still shows us that we can explore them or see them differently and give them their due stage and moment, or moment in the sun from a multilateral perspective of what we have right now. And we just had, because of this, 2 hands in the air.
Please use the microphone, so
Just to say that there is a cost of informality, and don't forget that the underdeveloped countries, they need a reason to come, because they need a reason to have a budget to come to places and to be able to discuss them, and they are drawn for money. I participate a lot in different groups on regulation policy with South American countries and African countries, and you cannot have informality because they need support. And with informality, you don't have support. Another thing is like-minded countries in Europe and like-minded countries in North America, that will work. But if you go outside of this realm, there is the cost of informality.
And there's another one.
in the back.
And another one.
But there will be no replies.
No, congratulations to LPAZ for again, and congratulations to the panel. And following the theme of this year, the Atlantic bridges, I just wanted to say that we are in the middle of a huge crisis and biodiversity and climate crisis, but we need hope. And I've seen in your presentation, Sylvia Earle, she recently turned 90 years, and I highly recommend you the Netflix series documentary Mission Blue, because we need hope. And just to say that Azores was recognized as a hope spot by Mission Blue, like the Dr. Sylvia Earle organization, in 2021. And also, I recommend you to watch The Ocean from the well-known David Attenborough that turned 99 this year. And I think most of us are far away from understanding the nexus between climate and ocean. And so I hope that this year at COP, that the ocean will be in the center of the agenda. And so I highly recommend you this to the commentaries, and thank you all.
Right.
May I just add one thing, just to complement not only the presentation and also what you said. I think that what is important is that we need to look at ocean and land as two interconnected topics and things. They are not separated. We need ocean and we need land. And what we see is that we have always had this land perspective on everything. And even you enclose the Convention of the Law of the Sea, even Elizabeth Borghese and Arvid Pardo have tried to bring some different thinking with water at the time. They were not successful 100% to do so. But now we really need to understand that everything is connected, land and ocean. And even Philip Steinberg considered that we need to look at the ocean as the extension of land. So this is not separated. Just wanted to add that. Thank you.
All right, so let's end here on a note of hope. So thank you for that. And I do believe that the more we engage with these issues, the more we are actually exposed to these ecosystems and to these realities, the more we will be also multipliers of hope out there. So thank you for joining us for another year of charging the batteries of hope here in Santa Maria. And we now go to the bus.
Yes.
And
The bus is right outside. So to the hotel, so everybody can rest for 1 hour.